Well, guys, it looks like it finally happened. Yesterday, Oracle closed the TikTok deal. Larry Ellison, along with partners who owe him favors and investors who have gotten rich off of previous deals, now control the infrastructure that's processing every video you scroll, every second of watch time, every micro expression your phone's camera captures while you're staring at the screen. Now, this has been a long time coming because for the past 4 years, Washington has been staging hearings about national security threats this and debates about China that and arguments about data sovereignty. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Project Texas was supposed to solve that problem. Oracle was hosting American user data on American servers while ByteDance maintained ownership. But that arrangement was always conditional. It was always one political shift away from collapsing. Now, it's not like there haven't been any changes to the platform. For instance, in July of 2025, as the deal was moving towards closure, TikTok hired Erica Mindell as their public policy manager for hate speech. Just a former instructor from the Israeli Defense Forces now deciding what 170 Americans get to say online. And the TikTok deal is where this story surfaces, but the foundation was laid decades earlier, in June of 1967, with a cat named Yitzhak. Hey guys, it's Drey from the Drey Dossier, and I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who has taken the time to like my videos and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm so glad to be moving off of TikTok and onto YouTube for the most part because TikTok it's getting bad. It's getting really bad, and it's going to get worse now that Larry Ellison has signed his name to these papers. And this video is informed by my much longer investigative series that I've been working on Substack called Who TF Am I Working For? And it's also informed by Mike Wilson's biography on Larry Ellison called The Difference Between God and Larry Ellison is that God doesn't think he's Larry Ellison. It just never gets old to say that out loud. Like, honestly, the best title ever written for any book about any human being ever. So in the last episode of this series, we covered how Oracle helped build China's surveillance state after the Tiananmen Square massacre, how American protest data from Chicago became training data for Chinese police departments, and how Larry Ellison just reheated IBM's nachos in order to create Oracle. And what I'm going to show you now is how those systems get tested in conflict zones and then exported globally. And as always, the full investigation with every source cited is available for free on my Substack, the Drey Dossier, and I'll link that in the description below. Also, I feel like it's my responsibility to state something very clearly. This investigation is about corporate power and surveillance infrastructure, not about Jewish people, not about religion. There are plenty of Jewish people and plenty of Israelis who oppose to the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the surveillance infrastructure that's being built there. Criticizing government policy and corporate power structures is fundamentally different from attacking people for their identity. If you can't see that distinction, then this video is not for you. So it's June 1967, and Larry Ellison is 23 years old. He's broke, and he's driving a beat-up Sunbeam Alpine, eating Kraft mac and cheese because that's all he can afford. He's bouncing between dead-end programming jobs in the Bay Area, and he's married to his first of many wives, Ada, and by every measure that matters, he's nobody. But that year, something fundamental happens on the other side of the world that would change Larry Ellison forever. The Six-Day War breaks out in the Middle East, and Israel, a country barely the size of New Jersey, is outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded, facing Egypt, Syria, and Jordan simultaneously. Basically, the entire Arab world is mobilizing to wipe them off the map. We're talking armies with Soviet-supplied weapons, tanks, and aircrafts, like 10-to-1 manpower advantage, 3-to-1 in tanks. And every military analyst in the world is watching this unfold and saying the same thing. Israel is done. They're going to lose, and they're going to lose badly. They're running the numbers, and the math doesn't work. The geography doesn't work. There is no scenario in which Israel survives this. But they didn't just survive. They won. Decisively, devastatingly. In 6 days, Israel completely dismantled 3 armies that, by all accounts, should have crushed them. They won through superior intelligence collection, better command and control infrastructure, and perfect execution based off of better information. They turned what every rational analysis said was certain defeat into total victory through information superiority. And Larry Ellison, this young broke programmer in a tiny apartment in California, could not look away from the TV. He took an entire week off work, unpaid, which he absolutely could not afford according to his wife, just to stay glued to the television, watching the tanks roll across the Sinai Peninsula, airstrikes light up Damascus, and watching the impossible military victory play out in real time. Which is strange, considering that he has no real connection to Israel. As I mentioned in the last episode, Ellison was adopted at 9 months old and raised by his aunt and uncle in Chicago. His adopted parents were Jewish, sure, but he rejected everything that they offered him. I mean, he refused to have a bar mitzvah as a teenager because he said it felt performative. He would often refer to religion as interesting mythology at best, and he wanted nothing to do with Judaism or Jewish identity. And when the war ended, Larry Ellison celebrated by naming his cat Yitzhak, after Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's defense chief who orchestrated the entire operation, which is a choice, right? A very specific choice. And when Yitzhak died a few years later, the cat, meaning Ellison, was inconsolable. He took 2 weeks off work. His wife said that he was non-functional. And 2 weeks mourning a cat named after a foreign military commander that he had never met from a country he had no personal connection to, representing faith that he had explicitly rejected, is a bit odd, right? Like, that's weird. And his wife at the time, Ada, couldn't understand his obsession. According to her, Larry was an ardent Zionist, which I'm not sure that I agree with. And I know that I referred to Ellison in my last video as a Zionist as well, but honestly, the more that I think about it and the more that I learn about him, the more I'm realizing that Zionist is the wrong label for him. I think that he is something much more complicated and honestly, much more dangerous. And I suppose the reason I don't consider him as Zionist is because what I believe Ellison fell in love with wasn't Judaism. I think it was the competence as a replacement for vulnerability and power as the opposite of victimhood that drew him into that war. It was the idea that intelligence can defeat brute force and that surveillance and data and precision can turn chaos into complete control. Because at that time, before 1967, Jewish identity in America was defined almost entirely by the Holocaust, by victimhood, survival, tragedy, never again. That was the only framework that people had. And suddenly, in 6 days, there's Yitzhak Rabin. He's a secular, chain-smoking, calculating military strategist who just pulled off one of the most stunning military victories in modern history through superior intelligence, better planning, and perfect execution. And so in many ways, I feel like that cat wasn't just a pet. It was this narcissistic projection, a symbol of a person that Ellison wanted to become, the architect of victory. And so when it died, he was probably mourning his own unrealized potential for that kind of power. Or maybe the cat was just a reincarnation of Israel's defense chief and was a raging Zionist. Who's to say, honestly? The point being that watching a system override physical reality crystallized in his mind during those 6 days and became the foundation of everything that he would build for the next 60 years. For a 23-year-old programmer whose entire job was imposing order on chaos through code, this was a proof of concept for an entire worldview. His religion wasn't Judaism. His religion was surveillance, data, and control. God isn't magic or faith or mystery. God is just better data processing. And it was 10 years later that he founded Software Development Laboratories, and where his first major contract was building a database for the Central Intelligence Agency with the project codename Oracle. And we went over that a bit more in the last episode, but from the very beginning, Larry Ellison has been building tools for intelligence agencies, and for the next 60 years, he'll have one particular state in mind as his theological proof of concept, the place where he can finally test it under real combat conditions with live human targets and prove that his 1967 revelation was correct. And here's where that appropriation becomes unmistakable. When Ellison positions himself as supporting Israel, or when he wraps Oracle's work in the language of protecting the Jewish state, that's not his identity, because remember, he rejected Judaism, he rejected the community. What he's doing now is wearing someone else's trauma as a camouflage for his actual ideology. Trump does this with Christianity all the time. I mean, no wonder the two of them are peas in a pod. And at Oracle's 2024 conference, he made that ideology explicit. He had said, and I quote, "AI is going to keep everyone on their best behavior. We're going to have supervision. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we are constantly going to be recording and reporting everything that's going on." That's the theology stated plainly. Total surveillance as a governing philosophy, perfect information as the solution to human chaos, and constant recording as the path to order. And he's been building towards that vision systematically for 50 years, starting in 1977 with the CIA, in 1989 with China after Tiananmen, 2001 offering to build America's national ID system, 2012 tracking Chicago protesters, all of which we went over in the last episode. And by 2021, he's ready for the final test. He needs a laboratory, one that'll let him prove that the theology works not just for tracking dissidents or identifying citizens, but for deciding who lives and who dies. And he needs someone in charge of that laboratory. He needs someone in power who shares the theology completely, who will give him access to everything. He needs Benjamin Netanyahu. In April of 2021, Israel announces a $1.2 billion contract to build a national government cloud called Project Nimbus, essentially creating an AWS for the entire Israeli government, every ministry, every agency, all running centralized cloud infrastructure. The winners of this massive contract were Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, two of the biggest names in enterprise computing. And instead of taking the loss with some grace and conducting a post-mortem to see what went wrong and preparing a better bid for the next contract cycle, Larry Ellison took a look at what AWS and Google had actually won and realized that they had only captured like half of the market, and it was the boring half at that. See, Project Nimbus was for for civilian government functions like email systems, file storage, and the Department of Transportation's traffic data, basically all of the mundane infrastructure that keeps modern government running day to day. But Israel has another category of digital infrastructure that wasn't a part of Project Nimbus, couldn't be a part of Project Nimbus because of how sensitive it is. Military command control systems, intelligence databases, targeting infrastructure, and surveillance networks that feed directly into operational decisions about strikes and raids. The kind of systems that can't go offline for even a second, that need to keep running even if the country is being actively bombed, and that process classified information that's too sensitive for standard commercial cloud agreements. And now that kind of infrastructure has always lived in Israeli government facilities, on Israeli government servers, under direct military control. But if somebody could build cloud infrastructure that's secure enough, resilient enough, and hardened enough to meet the military specifications, infrastructure that could survive the exact scenarios that Israeli defense establishments spend so much time planning for, then they could probably migrate those classified military systems to a private cloud infrastructure for the first time. And within weeks of losing Project Nimbus, Oracle announces that they're going to be building an Israeli cloud region anyways. And you know what? They'll be doing it on their own dime, with no contract, committing to $319 million of infrastructure with no guaranteed return. Just your everyday smart business decisions that are definitely not being driven by ego. And because Larry Ellison's not like the other girls, he's not going to be building some standard data center facility in Tel Aviv. Instead, they're going to be building a data center 9 stories underground in Jerusalem. And it'll be designed to survive direct missile strikes, hardened against electromagnetic pulses, and engineered specifically to keep operating during active warfare, even when everything above ground might be getting bombed into rubble. It's a sales pitch made out of concrete and steel. I mean, you can't trust your most sensitive military systems with AWS or Google in their standard data centers, but you could trust them in an Oracle fortress that could survive anything short of a nuclear strike. And as some of you may know, I have a similar theory for what's being built underneath the White House with the demolition of the East Wing. And if you haven't already, you should definitely go watch that video, but after this one, because I think you should hear what these data centers are being used for first. And so Oracle begins creating that infrastructure that's so essential to Israeli military operations that it becomes indispensable, so integrated into targeting systems that decisions outlive him, and so successful at optimizing violence that it validates everything he's believed since watching that war in 1967. 3 months later, in August of 2021, Benjamin Netanyahu takes a vacation. Not to Tel Aviv, not to Jerusalem, but to Larry Ellison's private island in Hawaii, a place called Lanai. And here's where it gets genuinely insane, because at this exact moment that the two of them are sipping Mai Tais and yucking it up on vacation, Larry Ellison is supposed to be serving as a witness to Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial of 2021. And if you're thinking to yourself, like, oh, that sounds like a pretty glaring conflict of interest, then congratulations, you understand ethics better than a billionaire technocrat. But what you need to understand about these two men is that this isn't friendship in any conventional sense, and it's definitely not business or networking. This is ideological alignment so complete that losing a billion-dollar contract doesn't even create tension between the two of them, because the money was never really the point. You see, Netanyahu came up through something called Sayeret Matkal, one of the world's most elite special reconnaissance units from the IDF that trains operatives to see everything from politics, warfare, human behavior as systems to be analyzed and controlled. Sounds like someone else I know. And based on his actions for over a decade in power, and based on his willingness to do literally anything to maintain that power, I don't think that he believes in Israel as an idea of the homeland any more than Ellison believes in Judaism as faith. To me, it seems like what he believes in is power, self-preservation, and the extraordinary usefulness of national rhetoric in maintaining both. For Ellison, the goal was proving his worldview correct and achieving immortality through building infrastructure so indispensable that it outlives him. He becomes a ghost in the machine, essentially. For Netanyahu, it's more political survival through technological superiority and the permanent maintenance of security threats that justify his continued rule. And this is what makes Ellison's work with Israel fundamentally different from the work that Oracle did with China. In China, Oracle was the contractor selling tools. The Chinese government had the vision for mass surveillance after Tiananmen Square, and Oracle provided the database technology for a mere paycheck. But in Israel, Oracle isn't following orders, they are writing the blueprint. And Ellison's personal ideology aligns perfectly with Netanyahu's security doctrine, making this a partnership of true believers rather than just a business transaction. So think about it like this. In China, Ellison was selling the shovels during the gold rush. But in Israel, Ellison owns the mine. So when the two of them are in Lanai together in August of 2021, 3 months after Oracle loses Project Nimbus and announces that they're going to be building an underground fortress anyway, I don't think those two are just braiding each other's hair and discussing the weather. I think they were discussing exactly what that infrastructure would be used for, which systems would be running on it, and how deeply Oracle can embed itself into Israeli military operations. Now, before we get into all of the classified programs and the AI targeting systems and all of the technology that turns surveillance into a weapon, you need to understand exactly what Gaza was before October 7th, because the infrastructure enabling this industrial scale killing didn't just materialize overnight when the war started. The war just weaponized systems that had been running and refining themselves for literal decades. Now, Gaza has frequently been referred to as the world's largest open-air prison, which sounds like an activist hyperbole until you actually look at the numbers and scale here. Over 2 million people living in 140 square miles, every single person tracked through multiple overlapping systems, every movement monitored and logged, every basic activity requiring permits that feed more data into centralized databases. Every resident of Gaza has a biometric ID card storing their fingerprints, iris scans, and facial recognition data in Israeli military databases. And you don't get the option to opt out because you need to have that ID to pass through all of the checkpoints that divide Gaza into zones that you can't otherwise move freely between. And those checkpoints are literally everywhere because the territory is very deliberately fragmented to prevent free movement of Palestinians. There's a permit system controlling everything that matters, leaving Gaza for medical treatment or bringing in construction materials, fishing more than 6 nautical miles offshore. Basically, any activity that might improve your material conditions or save your life is permitted. And surveillance towers stand every few hundred meters along the border fence, equipped with cameras running facial recognition algorithms, motion sensors that track any movement, and drones flying overhead constantly feeding video back to command centers. The Palestinian people, the residents of Gaza, have been living in an actual hell for nearly a decade. So needless to say, this laboratory has been running experiments for years, and October 7th was just when they deployed the results. And a lot happened in 2021 because, yes, the same year that Oracle broke ground on their underground bunker data centers, Oracle also began a partnership with the Israeli Air Force called Project Menta. This was allegedly meant to be a 4-year collaboration from 2021 to the end of 2025, which is right about now. Now, we don't know anything about Project Menta. The only reason we know it exists is because Oracle mentioned it in investor calls and internal communications, but I don't know what it actually does. Nobody really does. Oracle won't say it's classified, but what we do know is that there was internal Oracle Slack messages that were leaked, and the one message described it as a bunch of important military stuff that we can't share, and then punctuated with a sword emoji. You know, because when you're building infrastructure for industrial scale killing, what you really need is a little fun emoji at the end of those kinds of sentences to keep morale up around the office. Am I right? It's now July 2022, and Oracle is hosting training seminars in Israel for Unit 81, the IDF's intelligence technology division. These are the people who turn surveillance data into operational intelligence, the ones who make the kill or don't kill decisions. So Oracle is doing a bunch of hackathons and training them on Oracle Cloud infrastructure, showing them how to integrate all of their military operations with their cloud processing. And I believe all of this probably falls under the umbrella of Project Menta because they were very active from the year 2021 to 2025. For instance, by fall of 2023, Oracle announces a partnership with Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, the company behind the Iron Dome, for AI providing warfighters with rapid, actionable insights. The hell if I know what providing warfighters with rapid actionable insights means, but I guess that's classified too. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas attacks kill approximately 1,200 Israelis and take over 240 hostages. And Israel responds with Swords of Iron, which is the underground infrastructure that Oracle built, starting to process the data that decides where bombs land and who dies. But Lavender is more than just a button you push to drop a bomb. Lavender is an AI targeting system that analyzes massive amounts of data, phone intercepts, drone footage, surveillance cameras, social media, and generates kill lists for you. And according to 972 magazine, Lavender had marked approximately 37,000 Palestinians for death. Now, we can't confirm that Menta is the infrastructure that's making Lavender possible, and there were theories that Palantir was a part of making Lavender possible, but again, all of that is classified information, so it's just speculation. However, if you follow the logic, it's not that hard to see who's involved here, because you need an AI system processing petabytes of surveillance data in real time, and it needs a massive cloud infrastructure and processing power, and it needs to be able to work during an active war, meaning that the infrastructure must survive missile strikes. And I wonder who has an underground data center that could possibly handle that. Okay, so let me walk you through these AI-generated kill lists and what they were like throughout the entire war. So step one would be data collection, right? So your drones, surveillance cameras, cell towers, social media, every person generating a data trail just by existing. And step two is storage and processing. So that data gets stored in Oracle's underground bunkers and organized and processed at a massive scale. And keep in mind that they're looking for members of Hamas or people maybe connected to Hamas. So step three would be that AI analysis. Lavender would analyze all of that surveillance and all of that data and automatically generate these kill lists. So it would look at patterns, right? Who's calling whom and who's talking and meeting with whom, and it would build this profile based off of a Hamas operative and what that supposedly looks like. And then it would scan the entire population to find matches. Now, we don't really totally know what all of those benchmarks were, but we do know, according to reporting, that there was an error rate of around 10% with Lavender, meaning that 3,700 people were marked wrongly on these kill lists and had nothing to do with Hamas. And there was human oversight, technically. So when the Lavender would produce a name, an officer would take about 20 seconds and look at the name. And the only question the officer needed to ask was, is the target male? That's it. Now, step four is the most sedacious part of this. It's disgusting and it makes me want to throw up. So this is the automated tracking, and there was a second system paired with Lavender called Where's Daddy. So once Lavender produced a name, then Where's Daddy would track the people on Lavender's list using the phone signals and drones, learning their patterns and figuring out where they lived. Then it waits until the target gets home, until the target is sitting at dinner with their family or tucking their kids into bed. And that's when it would send an alert that target is home. Strike now. Somebody coded a system designed to wait for fathers to be home with their children before killing them, and then they named it Where's Daddy like it's some fucking game, like it's a joke. And then the last step, step five, is the strike. So the coordinates are set, the bomb is dropped, building destroyed, everybody inside dies, and the system moves on to the next name. That's autonomous warfare, baby. That is AI doing its part. This is warfare being run like a tech startup, and Oracle's infrastructure is the one making it possible. And of course, Larry Ellison wasn't operating alone, because Oracle's, at the time, co-CEO, Safra Catz, decided to take a couple of meetings in January of 2024. 3 months into the war, when tens of thousands are dead and entire neighborhoods are reduced to rubble, and the world is watching. And she flies to Israel and holds 3 meetings. One with Netanyahu, one with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, I think it's pronounced, and one with War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz. And then shortly after, Oracle announces that they are building a second underground data center during active combat. And whenever Oracle was asked why they were so committed to Israel, Safra Catz would say that Israel is Oracle's most important customer. Not the biggest customer, the most important one, and that distinction, I think, matters. But ideology can only get you so far when you're an American company subject to American law, so Oracle needs one more piece if this puzzle's going to work: the political cover. In April of 2015, presidential candidate Marco Rubio launches his campaign attacking Obama for hostility towards Israel. Remember when Marco Rubio ran for president? Oh my God, he's gonna do it again. He's gonna do it again in 2028. It's gonna be so interesting to see him compete with J.D. Vance for this presidential bid, because they're both gonna run in 2028. And J.D. Vance, while everybody thinks he's Silicon Valley's, good boy, he's really Peter Thiel's good boy. And Marco Rubio is Larry Ellison. So it'll be interesting to see who wins out. But I digress. That's a conversation for a later time. A few days later, after the speech, thanks to emails that would eventually be leaked, we learned that Ron Prosser, who was serving as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations at the time, sent Larry Ellison an email with the subject line, Marco Rubio. The email had asked if Ellison had met the candidate yet, and then posed a question that I really need you to hear because the phrasing is so specific. He wrote, "Did he pass your scrutiny?" Not what did you think of him, not did you like him or do you think he would be good for Israel, but did he pass your scrutiny? Which, that is quality control language. That's the kind of language you use when you're testing a product before you're deciding whether or not to buy it. And it just shows you how much control Larry Ellison has over American politics and our relationship with Israel. And then He gives Rubio the stamp of approval. And then cut to 1 year later in 2016, Ellison is donating $5 million to Rubio's super PAC, a single contribution, by the way, that represents 20% of all of the money that Rubio's campaign manages to raise during the entire Republican primary. And Rubio doesn't win the nomination, of course, because he's deeply unlikable in ways that become painfully obvious during primary debates. But Trump does. And here's the thing, is that Ellison isn't exactly sad about it. This was never really about Rubio specifically. This was about building relationships, about creating these obligations, about investing strategically in people who would eventually hold real power and remember very clearly who helped them when it mattered. So Ellison pivots to Trump without any hesitation. He hosts these high-dollar fundraisers at his Rancho Mirage estate and pours money into Trump's orbit and becomes one of the administration's most reliable billionaire allies. But unfortunately for Ellison, Trump loses the 2020 election. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, Larry Ellison probably took that loss. Well, he didn't. Because of course he didn't. On November 14th, 2020, just days after the election is called for Biden, it is on record that Larry Ellison joins a conference call with Senator Lindsey Graham, Fox News host Sean Hannity, Trump's lawyer Jay Sekulow, and James Bopp Jr., representing True the Vote, a Texas nonprofit that was pushing voter fraud claims. And by the sounds of it, Larry Ellison was pissed. He was livid because Larry Ellison has just put a lot of money into Trump. He has plans in Israel that he needs to get done. So these bozos start workshopping a way to contest the election results and start challenging the legitimacy of American democracy. But instead, they start to strategize. This is when they start getting together all of the Silicon Valley billionaires and the politicians that are corrupt beyond belief, and they start building Project 2025 and start putting into place who's going to be where, doing what, and it gives them more time to collaborate and build this nightmare that we're all living in right now. And Marco Rubio really comes into clutch here because he's the guy who passed Larry Ellison's scrutiny nearly a decade earlier, and he's the guy that Ellison invested in when nobody thought that he had a chance, because he didn't. And now he's in a very strategic position as the United States Secretary of State. So he's implementing visa policies that protect Oracle's interests, overseeing weapon shipments to Israel, and shaping diplomatic relationships with countries where Oracle operates or wants to operate. This is how you create political infrastructure that functions as a permission structure. I mean, this is how you ensure that when Oracle starts building these classified military AI infrastructures in Israel, and when that infrastructure enables industrial scale killing in Gaza, and when journalists start asking those really uncomfortable questions, you have people in positions who have enormous power who will defend it reflexively and who will frame any criticisms of it as anti-Semitism or dangerous naivety, and at the end of the day, who will ensure that the weapons keep flowing and that the contracts keep coming and that nobody looks too closely at what those systems actually do. You may not have voted for Larry Ellison, but Larry Ellison is shaping your foreign policy in ways that you'd never see on a ballot. And when American democracy itself became inconvenient to his plans, he got on a conference call and tried to help dismantle it. And to just kind of bring this back to Larry Ellison buying TikTok, it makes me incredibly nervous considering how much propaganda he's helped push out for the state of Israel. I mean, immediately when Swords of Iron began in 2023, pro-Israel content starts flooding social media accounts globally, and these hashtags are trending across Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and talking points were distributed to influencers in real time. And while that was bots pushing out content trying to normalize genocide, now that he owns TikTok and owns it, because he doesn't need the bots anymore. He controls the algorithm. I mean, think about what Benjamin Netanyahu said in October, was it, of this year, when he was talking to all of those young kids and he was saying, what's the most important purchase of 2025? TikTok. Shaping the media narrative is literally the only way that these people are getting away with all of these war crimes. And now he's gonna find a way to get frickin' CNN. I know it. So where does that leave us? We have Oracle, who's controlling TikTok, and this deal that Donald Trump personally helped facilitate. And the head of Oracle's reconstruction efforts in Gaza is Tony Blair, which is a whole problem in and of itself. Because Tony Blair being the, chief peace officer or head of peace or whatever he is absolutely insane. Because the reality is that there is no peace in Gaza, first of all. Palestinians are still being murdered daily, relentlessly. Israel is still bombing Gaza. There are 2 million people living in tents, in flooding right now in the winter. Children are freezing to death because their homes were destroyed and there's no materials allowed in to rebuild any of them. The border is still sealed. People are still starving. Deliberately, starvation is being used as a weapon still. The infrastructure, the water sewage systems, electricity, hospitals, all of that has been systematically destroyed, and none of it is being rebuilt because Israel won't allow materials in. There is no humanitarian aid allowed in. And in this context is Tony Blair, who is a war criminal himself, but but that's a story for another time. All you need to know right now is that he's Larry Ellison's guy. He's funded with $250 million from Ellison's foundation and is supposedly planning Gaza's reconstruction. He now runs the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, a think tank that consults with governments worldwide on modernization and digital transformation, which actually just means that Tony Blair shows up in countries and helps them build surveillance infrastructure using Oracle as the base. I mean, the fact that the man who helped destroy Iraq and is now helping reconstruct Gaza using surveillance technology that's funded by a man who built the infrastructure that enabled the killing in the first place would be a joke if it weren't so goddamn sad. And in the next video, we'll get into what those Gaza reconstruction plans look like, because they look a lot like what's getting pressed on us right now. You know, the proposal calls for biometric ID systems for every resident, with blockchain land registries managed by entities that you have no oversight of. And the proposal specifically names Oracle and Palantir as the preferred vendors for the entire technology stack. Did you know, by the way, that Larry Ellison tried to buy Palantir back in, like, what was it, 2012 or something like that? And they wouldn't sell it to him, which is why he ended up making his own similar kind of project from all of the data from the Chicago protests, and he sold that to China. That was his version of Palantir. That's a whole story in and of itself. And so with that, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, okay, what the fuck do I do with this information? Like, it's a lot to take in, I know. And if I'm being honest, I don't know. I don't know what we do with this information. I don't know how we spring into action. I don't know if individual action even matters when we're talking about an infrastructure that's this entrenched. And that's not me trying to be pessimistic. I'm just being honest. But what I do know is that we can't fix problems that we don't understand, and we can't resist systems that we can't see. And right now, most people don't really know who Larry Ellison is or what Oracle does, or let alone what they've been building. Maybe the first step in all of this is just making sure that we're all looking at the same reality, that we're all looking at the same infrastructure and the same pipes, and we're understanding these systems before they become so embedded that resistance isn't possible any longer. And that's why I make these videos, because I believe that if enough people understand what's actually being built, then somebody smarter than me will figure out what to do about it. And maybe that's you. I hope it's you. Please tell me it's you. And I don't have all the answers, but I can make sure that you have the information. Again, if you want to see any of the receipts from this video, head over to the Drey Dossier and my Who, TF, and my Working For series. At the bottom of every one of those articles is a list of receipts and documents that you can comb through. And with that, we'll continue the tradition of leaving you on a positive note, right, Newt?